Yeah. Okay, so the last lectures have basically been holding fixed the details of the products that firms were selling and the pricing that they used, and instead just looking at how they changed quantity and thereby changed some uniform price that they were charging, right? And today I'm going to talk about how firms actually design, price, and market products. And this is implicitly going to cover a whole lot of what's usually called mechanism design or contract theory, but from a little bit of a different perspective than maybe you're used to seeing it. So I'll start by talking about the tools and goals of firms in designing their products. I'll then talk about Spence's model of marginal versus inframarginal consumers and how you design your products to cater to one rather than the other. I'll then talk about Hotelling's model and applications of that model to politics. Then I'll turn to applications to newspapers, policy design, and platforms. I'll then talk about the intensive margin of participation in a product or purchase of a product and the sorting of consumers, and an application of that to Laurent Aynave and co-authors' work on consumer credit markets. And then on Tuesday, after you're done with the midterm, I'm going to follow up with a lecture that will build very closely on this one to think about price discrimination. And we'll view that largely as an application of the principles today. Okay. So in considering product design, there are two basic issues. First, you have to think, what are the firm's goals in designing products? And second, what are the tools that they have to achieve those goals? And those goals are going to be to keep costs low, right, and prices high, while attracting as many consumers as possible, and attracting the most valuable consumers, if consumers have different values to the firm, and avoiding the most costly firms. And what makes consumers valuable is either they're directly valuable to the firm, or they're indirectly valuable because those consumers are valued by other consumers involved with the firm. And I'll talk about that in a second. And then the firm's going to have a set of tools or instruments. So one is a uniform price. And that's not the focus today, right? Because we've already been talking about that for the last two lectures. Second are sort of discriminatory or sophisticated non-uniform prices. And we'll talk about those on Tuesday. They can also change the range of products they offer. Again, I'm going to leave that for Tuesday. Today, instead, I'm going to talk about non-price characteristics of firms' products. So the quality of the product, the ease of it to use, its color, etc., how niche the product is or what niche it appeals to, what market segment it targets, and so forth. The advertising or marketing to the consumers that's done, the placement of the product, and the group of consumers that purchase the product. Even though that's one thing that the firm has to seek to achieve as a goal, it's also a tool. So for example, I'm actually going tonight to the restaurant Next, and I think a major part of the restaurant Next strategy is actually getting so many people obsessed with going there, because that spreads the hype about the restaurant by word of mouth, right? And a platform is a firm that both tries to attract certain types of consumers or certain numbers of consumers, but views that not just as a direct source of profit, but also as a tool that it can use to attract other consumers. Okay, so today we're going to learn how to use these instruments to achieve these goals. Okay, now a typical way of dividing up these tools or instruments is as vertical or horizontal. So a vertical property of a product is one that all consumers agree is either good or bad. And price is sort of the simplest example, but quality, overall quality more generally, is another example. Speed of internet connection, level of coverage in an insurance product. And consumers may differ in how much value they put on this thing, but all view it as a good thing. Horizontal characteristics, on the other hand, are characteristics that some consumers think are good, but other consumers think are bad. And often we model this as saying consumers have some ideal point where they would like the product to be. and that any difference from this will make it worse. We'll see a simple model of that below, the hoteling line. But you already used one, the Salop circle, in your problem set. Other examples of these things would be colors, flavors, designs, styles, political bias. Now, even more often, products are what I would call diagonal. Characteristics are what I would call diagonal, which is that most but not all consumers view it as beneficial. And some may feel differently, but everyone differs in many ways in both how much they care about something and whether they view it as a positive or negative. So most things are sort of a mix of being vertical and horizontal, but some things are more close to being vertical, some more close to being horizontal. The key thing to note about this is what makes a characteristic horizontal or vertical is not really a property of the product or its characteristics, but rather the nature of heterogeneity among consumers. So in a Republican town, 100% Republican town, being Republican is just a vertical character, like a newspaper being more Republican is just a vertical characteristic, right? Everyone values it the same. In a town that is socialists and, and Tea Party conservatives living in the same town, it's going to be very much a horizontal characteristic, right? So it's really about how consumers differ rather than about the nature of the product characteristic that makes something vertical versus horizontal. Okay. So there's three basic effects I want to highlight today. The first is Spence's idea that we want to cater to marginal or elastic consumers rather than to inelastic or inframarginal consumers. That's sort of the fundamental idea behind price discrimination. And its most general expression comes from this model by Spence. The second concept is that we're going to be restrained in our ability to just cater to the marginal consumers by the fact that consumers might change how much they participate in or buy a firm's product. So it's not just whether they buy or not, but sort of how much they buy, how loyal they are, et cetera. And that's the notion of the Musa-Rosen model. And the final thing, which comes from my paper with Andre Vega, is the notion that firms may use their product characteristics to get particularly valuable sorts of consumers to buy their products. My paper with Andre is sort of a unified model that covers all these things, and that'll sort of be the framework that we use for today. But I want to add the pieces one by one to try to highlight each one of them. So I'm going to start with the Spence model, then I'll add the Musa-Rosen effect, and finally the one that comes from my paper with Andre. I don't know if anyone met Andre when he was here last year, but he took the price theory course. Okay, so suppose that we have many consumers, and each either buys a product or doesn't buy a product, and it's a monopoly product. And the consumers get a utility, U of rho, that depends on their type, theta, and the quality of the product, rho, some non-price dimension of quality, and then they pay a price, so they have quasi-linear utility. And the types are distributed in some abstract space according to some density function f of theta. Anyone who has a utility that's greater than the price is going to purchase the product. And the number of people who buy the product is going to be just the integral of the density over the set of types that have a utility that's above the price. Right? Let the set of people who buy the product, those who have utility greater than the price, be this capital theta here. Okay. So throughout this lecture, we're going to be taking derivatives of integrals like this. And in order to do that, because this is in multiple dimensions, we need a multidimensional version of Leibniz's rule, right? Because Leibniz's rule is what, in a single dimension, let us take the derivative of an integral, right? Okay. So let's see if we can figure that out. So Leibniz's rule says that there are two effects when you take the derivative of an integral. Chrissy, what are those two effects, and how can we interpret them economically?
So you have the
Yeah.
inside, and then you have the effect of passing the derivative through, taking the derivative of the function during a given number. And economically, the derivative of the bound is looking at how your marginal consumers are changing.
Yeah.
And the derivative of the interior of the integral is how the inframarginal
Yeah, that's right. Another way to put that is extensive margin versus intensive margin. So there's two margins. How many people are buying your product or who's buying your product versus how much of the product are those people buying or how much are they participating in your service, right? So the boundary effect is the integral around the boundary of how much the boundary changes times the value of the function at that point. This is the extensive margin, people entering or exiting the market. The shorthand that we'll give for this is the integral over the set of all people who are on the boundary who from g is equal to 0 of the density I guess this should have been on x as well, sorry, y and x, times the how much people are attracted in by the change in y, right? So that is if certain types of people's utility increases much more when we increase y, we're going to get more of those people coming in than of the people who aren't attracted that much by this, right? Now, this particular integral is actually not quite right. If you look at the paper, you'll see the right notation, but this is a reasonable sort of shorthand for it, and I'm not going to try to burden you with the technical definition, because this is really an integral in one less dimension than the whole space, and you have to do some things to take care of that. Okay. Second, there's the effect on the interior, the intensive effect, as Chrissy was talking about, which is the integral on the interior of the value of the derivative of this function. This is the intensive margin. This is the people who are already participating in the service, buying the product, how they change the value you get out of them, right? Okay. So let's let the set of marginal consumers, the set of people who are just on the boundary, be partial cap theta, which is the set of all people with utility equal to p, sorry, not 0. Okay, so let's try applying this logic. Does someone want to try to take the derivative of the number of people with respect to the price using this logic? So the number of people participating is this n here. Okay, well, we need to say, when I change the price, does that change the interior of this? Well, it doesn't. That doesn't directly depend on price. It changes the boundary. How much does it change the boundary? Well, for everyone, the effect of increasing price is -1, right? So we get -1 times this integrated over the boundary, right? So we get negative of the integral over partial theta of f of theta. And let's define this whole thing here as the number of marginal people, m. So this is negative m. M is the density of marginal people, right? Okay. So we're going to measure everything in terms of the fraction of people who participate. And then we'll write the cost function as depending on that fraction of people who participate and the non-price quality dimension rho. So the firm is going to make profits and seek to maximize profits, which are equal to the product of price and the number of people minus the cost, right? Optimal price is still going to be given by marginal